So we're moving on to task 4. So I'm going to enter the little heading in here and move my comment down. And so for task 4, we're going to be using the top keyword to give us the top results. We're also going to be using null and not null. And we're going to be doing a much more complicated filter using both the or and the and logical operators. So we'll start with our top query. So we are going to be using the AP database again. And we're going to do a select, and it's going to be from invoices. And let's go up to our select. What we are choosing is the vendor ID and the invoice total. And we want to sort. And if you're going to do a top query, you pretty much have to sort. And we're going to sort by the invoice total. And what we want are the top 5 invoice totals. So after the select, we're going to key in top 5. And because we're sorting by invoice total, that's what it's going to end up retrieving. And let's see, we do want the highest amount, so we better put descending in here for our sort. And let's go ahead and run this. And you can see that the invoice totals are in descending order, and we do have the values going from the highest to the lowest. And when you use just a regular top 5, it only returns 5 records. That's a little bit different than doing a percentage, because a percentage is going to give you whatever percent you're asking of the total. So how many records you display is dependent on how many records are in the result set. So we are going to change this to top 5%. And then we're going to run it again. And this time we actually ended up with 6. Okay, and again, they are looking at what we sorted by, and we sorted by invoice total. So we're going to move our closing comment, and we're going to do another query. And for this second query in our 4th task, this is a much more complicated query. We're going to be using our invoice table. So we'll say use AP, select, we'll leave that alone for a second, and we're going to do from invoices. And then let's go back up to select. We want the invoice number, and we want the invoice date, and we want the invoice total. And then we have a little calculated column, which is the invoice total minus the invoice payment total minus the credit total. And we are going to label that with an alias of balance due. All right, so those are the columns that we want displayed. And we need to filter this. And our filter is going to be rather complicated. So we want to look at the invoice date. And the date needs to be greater than 2016. /01/01 or the invoice total needs to be greater than 500, and the balance due has to be greater than 0. So if you remember from a previous task, you cannot put an alias in the where clause. So we actually have to take this calculation, copy it and paste it down here, and check for that greater than 0. And that is the end of our select. So I'm putting in the semicolon. And how this is going to evaluate is it's going to do the and. So it's going to look for the balance due greater than 0 and an invoice total greater than 500, or it's just going to look at the date. And if either side, if all of this is true, or if this is true, the record is going to display. So let's go ahead and execute. Whoops. Does not like it when you execute if something is highlighted. So we've got the date. And if the date is greater than 0101, it meets the criteria. And then it's looking at, and I don't really see any dates that are less than 0101, but it was also looking at the second side. So if either this side or this side was true, it would display. So what we're going to do is change this up a little bit. What we really want it to do is we want it to look for the invoice date or the total. Okay, so it can have an invoice date of 01/01/2016, or it can have a total greater than 500. But all of the records that are selected have to have a balance due greater than 0. And if you look right now, we got a lot of balance dues that are 0. So this is going to dramatically change our results. Okay, because now this has to be true, and either one of these can be true. Okay, but because we did the and on the balance due, that's why we are seeing much less records display. And let's go ahead and move that. And then for our last little sequence of queries, we're actually going to be using a different database. So instead of AP, we are now using examples. So let me kind of contract all of these, and let's expand examples. And for the tables, the table that we are using for this is called NULL sample. Great name. Okay, so we just got a couple columns in there, not a whole lot going on. But we are going to select all of the columns. And we're selecting from NULL sample. And what we want are only the columns that have an invoice total that first we're going to look for ones that are null, and then we're going to modify it, look for ones that are not null. So we do need to have a where clause here. And we're going to look for invoice total. First we're looking for is null. Okay, and let's go ahead and run that. So we got 1. And now we're going to change this, and we're going to look for is not null. Okay, and at this point we are done. So let's move our comment down, and we will save our changes. And at this point, what you're going to do is close out of here. You're going to find your Chapter 3 textbook assignment, and you're going to upload it to the Dropbox.